to our Facebook Live. It always feels like kind of a party anytime I come on to a Facebook Live. And I'm hoping that you've got a nice cup of tea and you're in a nice relaxed spot and you've got some comfy clothes on. I have to admit that I'm kind of in my COVID chic kind of outfit where it's business on top and there might be jammies on down there. So I'm not going to stand up and show you what I have on from my waist down. It might be flannel, but we are here to relax and enjoy and create a new relationship with carbohydrates. And before we really dive in, I want to remind you, for those of you who are alive in the 80s and 90s, and for those of you who weren't, I want to take us back for a second, back into the 1980s and 90s, where carbs were super in fashion, that eating carbohydrates, no matter how refined they are, was the epitome of health, and it was how you lost weight. Could that be kind of similar to, I don't know, the protein world we're in now, where it doesn't matter how refined that protein is, if it's protein, it's good for you? But in the 80s, it was fat that was bad. And as long as it was low fat, it was good for you. So that is a bagel with low-fat cream cheese, wholly carbs. Nobody thought of counting grams of carbs. They only counted grams of fat. It was pasta. It was enormous amounts of pasta. Pasta with butter was seen as okay, even though that butter was a little unhealthy for you. We switched our butter out for margarine, and people dreamed of potato chips because they were fatty, of guacamole, of having avocado. Avocado was super out of fashion. And was that true? Were we right? No. By the early 2000s, obesity was at the highest rate it had ever been, and so was heart disease and diabetes. And so the powers that be came in and said, "Oh, I've got it. I know what's wrong. It was carbs. Carbs were the problem. We need to cut them right out of our lives." And now protein is king. And around the 2000s, we were getting huge amounts of fat deficiencies. And so this sounded really good to us because we could eat guacamole again. We just needed to have it on, I don't know, cheese chips or something. Like it was a huge about face of what we thought was good for us. And so it led to a lot of confusion. So I came into the nutrition world right around this time in 2002. And a lot of people were like eating as much protein as they possibly could, but they were still unsure about fat and they were definitely off carbs. And so we had this time of attempting rebalance where I was putting fat in people's diet constantly because they were so deficient. And if we fast forward now to almost 20 years in the future, I'm seeing enormous amounts of carb deficiencies. I am seeing carbohydrates cravings are just absolutely humongous. And so therefore, there's going to be a moment, I predict, in the near-ish future where somebody's going to cash in on these huge carb deficiencies and say, "Oh, I know it was wrong. It was protein's fault." And the fashion of food, the fashion of food is just fashion. It's as nutritionally sound as bell bottoms. And it's there to sell products. It's there to sell a lifestyle. It's there to sell books. Because the real truth is we needed fat in the 80s and 90s, just like we need here. And what happened after fat came back into style is we developed a more nuanced conversation about fat. We understood that not all fat is equal, that refined fats like corn oil and vegetable oil and trans fats and margarine, now those are problematic. Those are ones that we need to keep low in our diet. But fats are essential and they're important, and we need to have all those whole food fats in our diet. We need to create a similar nuanced conversation about carbohydrates. they're not all created equal, although they're vilified equally. That when somebody comes to me and puts potatoes and high fructose corn syrup pop in the same category, and this happens all the time, this is how I know we need a nuanced conversation. And so that's what we're going to bring in today, is we're going to have this nice big nuanced conversation. And I'm hoping, I want to answer your questions, so please enter them in the comments. And I don't know if I can see the comments. Oh, there, I can turn the comments on. Yay. Okay, I can see the comments. And so I'm going to talk for a little bit as you write in comments or questions anytime you have them. And then I'm going to stick around and answer your questions. So don't hesitate when you have a question just to plop it in, but I can't actively see it the where I am right now. So I can't answer them in the moment. But let's take a look at what it looks like if you have a carb deficiency, because the word carb deficiency almost seems like an impossibility right now. But all three macronutrients, carbs, fats, and proteins, are of equal importance. And so we're understanding how fat is important. We know that protein's important, but how is carbs important? There are practitioners that will argue with me and say no, carbohydrates aren't necessary because the body will get glucose, which is in carbohydrates, of course, other ways. It can convert protein. If you don't have any carbs in your diet, your body will convert protein and then convert fat. But it does that because glucose is so essential. And so your body is creating backup plans just in case there is a famine or there's a crop shortage or something happens and there's no carbohydrates. And so it idolizes carbohydrates for the best form of glucose. Then it will convert protein to glucose if needed. So a high protein diet, so half that protein is getting converted to glucose. But it's kind of clunky. It's not the clean way that carbohydrates are. And then if it absolutely has to, it will then convert fat into ketones, which can be used for energy, but it's the clunkiest and it's the absolute last resort. And the other reason why I know, or I feel like the tides are about to turn, is the popularity of the ketogenic diet. That these really extreme versions tend to come out right before we have a big change. So that's why I'm hoping. In the late 90s, we had, I think, the DASH diet, which was like no fat, no oil, no salt, no flavor. Ugh. Anyways, back to the story of carb deficiencies. So carbohydrates, let's give some love to carbohydrates for a few minutes, just so we can kind of feel out and see why we need them so badly. So carbs, all the carbohydrate foods, so that is fruits, all vegetables, including broccoli, but also the starchy ones like potatoes and sweet potatoes, nuts and seeds, beans, and whole grains. These are the main carbohydrate foods. They are where your nutrients live. Vitamins, minerals, polyphenols, antioxidants, all the phytonutrients. They live in carbohydrates. And so the big deficiency that I'm seeing are multiple nutrient deficiencies. And that's because when we're on a low carb diet, it's really, really hard to get enough nutrients. And so people who are on super mega low carb diets tend to have a big symptom of nutrient deficiencies, which is their hair falls out. Hair and nails are the least important part of your body. And so your body just sheds them when there isn't enough nutrients. And so whenever I see that, that's always a red flag of, how they're eating is low in nutrients or low in specific nutrients. There just might be an absorption problem. Carbs are also the source of the fiber that our gut bacteria eats. And we now know how important this ecosystem is in our gut, and it is fed on plant-based fiber. And if you eat a low-carb diet, research is starting to find that it is related to this low diversity and low numbers of bacteria in your gut. And so we really need to be feeding our gut bacteria better, because low numbers and low diversity is connected to immune system problems, to mental health issues, possibly there's a gut-brain connection, and even metabolic issues like low metabolism. When you have a lower number of bacteria in your gut, they're finding now that you may actually absorb more energy from the food you eat. So lower gut bacteria means you get more bang for every mouthful of food, which is fine if you're in a famine, but it's not so fine if there's food everywhere. There's also a serotonin connection to carbohydrates. Serotonin gets shunted into your brain or in different parts of your body when we have a high carb meal, which is why people who are in a lot of pain uses a lot of serotonin. They tend to crave sugar, but refined white sugar can also trigger a lot of pain. And so if you're living in that cycle, this is a physical cycle that's happening, and it's just refined white sugar that makes the pain worse. By bringing in more starches, you can actually calm down that pain by also cutting down those cravings so you can get the white sugar out. But the very most important thing is glucose. Carbohydrates are the source of glucose. And what I've been hearing a lot for the last 4 or 5 years is, well, when referring to things like a starchy vegetable or a whole grain, well, doesn't that just turn into sugar? And the answer is yeah, it does. But there's a nuance here. Sugar isn't inherently bad. Glucose is needed for every cell to function. What the conversation is how quickly does it go into your bloodstream? And there's an enormous difference between drinking a can of pop full of high fructose corn syrup that the glucose goes straight into your bloodstream and the fructose goes straight to your liver, and a potato that has nutrients and fiber and gives you a much more steadier hit of glucose into your bloodstream. And all carbohydrates turn into glucose. So it's not some do and some don't. Like, you can't, if you eat broccoli, it will also turn into sugar. If you eat nuts, it will also turn into glucose. If you eat protein, it will also turn into glucose. It's about how quickly does it go into your bloodstream, because it's high blood sugar. When our blood sugar sits too high, that it can trigger inflammation, and also that energy gets stored. And so what we want to do is keep carbohydrates in our life, but keep our blood sugar steady. Because you may have already realized this, but your body will always win. If you actively lower something in your diet, your body will ask for it all the time. And so a big symptom of carb deficiencies are sugar cravings. And some of you watching right now may think, yeah, Lisa, but when I'm off sugar, I don't crave it so much. But it turns into this teeter-tottering circle of, when you're on sugar, you can crave a lot because you got these blood sugar ups and downs. But when you're off it, you're using willpower, and eventually your body in a quiet moment will say, remember how good ice cream is? Do you remember cupcakes? Do you remember how glorious cupcakes are? And now you're back on sugar. And so look at your sugar cravings as a constitutional need for something sweet and something carby. I have the constitution that I need something sweet. I eat something sweet every day. It's usually fruit. Sometimes it's a healthy baking. I made some glorious peanut butter chocolate chip cookies yesterday. That's been making me very happy. And it's about finding sweet tasting food, carbohydrate balancing food that help you find balance. And your evening cravings are key. Look at your evening cravings not as a weakness, not as a lack of willpower, but as a clue. Evening cravings tend to be a sign that you've either not eaten enough all day long, or you haven't eaten enough carbohydrates for both the nutrients and the energy balance. And so always be using that signal of evening cravings as, maybe my body's a little out of balance, and just say, okay, what can I do to find a better balance? And women, those of you who are watching, you may already intuitively know this, but women's bodies are significantly more sensitive to a low carb diet. And therefore, our bodies will push us off a low carb diet as quickly as humanly possible. They're also more sensitive to fasting. and combining the two is really, really hard on the body. Women's bodies need a steady set of carbohydrates, both for nutrients, but also for hormone balance. And that if our body thinks there isn't enough carbohydrates in your life, it will drop your hormones to, in some cases, menopausal levels in a 20-year-old. And so this is why women have louder cravings, I believe. Like I've seen how men do definitely get cravings, but especially when they're not eating enough carbohydrates. But women, we just kind of always have that monkey on our shoulder talking to us all the time. And I've seen over and over and over again the power of making friends with carbohydrates. I'm going to open up the floor for questions in just a few minutes. So if you just joined us, please enter your questions in the comments, and I'm going to go through all of them and answer all of them. But I have two things to talk about first. The first one is we are here for Nature's Fair's winter wellness sale. And so this is a service, this is a fun event that's sponsored by Nature's Fair to celebrate their winter wellness event. And it is December 3rd and 4th. I have a note so I don't miss anything. So it's December 3rd and 4th. It's at all stores, and it's 15% off vitamins, supplements, and personal care. So I'm going to mention that again later, but don't forget to go to the store on Friday and Saturday. I've already got my list of supplements that I'm going to pick up during the sale. I always take advantage of these moments. And I'd like to tell you a story of a friend and a colleague of mine who this is the clearest story of the power of listening to your body that I've seen so far in my practice. So I'm a holistic nutritionist. I've been a holistic nutritionist for 13 years. Oh, I wrote this book on dieting. So this is my book if you want more on this philosophy. And I met with this woman. She's given me permission to share her story, but I don't share her name. And let's call her Jane. So I met with her, it must have been 4 or 5 years ago at this point. And she is also a practitioner, not a nutritionist, but in the alternative medicine world. And she was eating really well in general. And we were talking about different things and different ways to find balance. And then the pink icing came out. So she had this pattern where she could be off sugar, all things sweet, for weeks and months at a time. And then she just couldn't do it any longer. And she'd fall into a pink icing hole where she would eat enormous amounts of pink icing for days, sometimes weeks, sometimes months. And eventually she could move back and go back onto her no sugar diet. When I looked at her and looked at her constitution, her Ayurvedic, she has a lot of the Ayurvedic dosha pitta in her for sure, because she's entrepreneurial and driven and brilliant. And she also had a very physical job. And both of those need sweet things, needs the taste of sweet. And so I introduced a different idea. Instead of going off all sugar, what if you regularly ate fruit and gave yourself something sweet the moment you felt the twinge? So what we tend to do is wait as long as possible, and that can turn into this big long binge. But instead, just like the second you feel you have the craving, just have some and enjoy it, like really sit and enjoy it. And when I followed up with her a few weeks or a few months later, her pink icing cravings were gone. And I followed up with her again a few years later. She's a woman in my life, so I get to talk to her regularly. So when I asked her if I could share the story, she shared with me that for years, her pink icing cravings have been under control. She might have some pink icing, but it never lasts as long as it used to. And fruit plays a significant role in her life. And she starts her day with a lot of fruit. She has it regularly through the day. Her body has found balance. She feels really good. And she no longer is driven by this craving of pink icing. And that's my goal for everybody. I'm also Nature's Fair's nutritionist. You can book a free half-hour consult with me or I believe there's 3 other nutritionists that you can book a consult with. So if you want some help, we're here to help you. And my favorite thing is craving whispering. It's figuring out what that craving might mean. I do also have a private practice if you want a longer, more in-depth consultation, but start with the free half hours. It's a wonderful service provided by Nature's Fair, and I can help kind of dive in and figure out your cravings. So let me just see if there's any comments or questions that have come in so far. See, I can't see any, but maybe they are there that maybe I can't see them. there is a possibility that I can't see the questions. So Melissa, I know you're watching. Let me know if there are questions that I'm missing. But I made a few notes that we can talk about just in case there wasn't any particular questions that came in. And the first one is, so how the heck do you add some more carbs? Especially if you've been off carbs for so long. And what I would recommend, especially if you have a tendency of having big carb cravings at night, is to add carbs to breakfast and lunch. These are two meals that are really, 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 really easy to miss. Let me just check what Melissa's telling me. Back to my story, I got sidetracked. So breakfast and lunch, these are the times where our willpower is at the absolute highest. And so it's really easy to eat a small meal in those times, to eat less, and to especially be at low carb. And what I would recommend is having little bits throughout the day. So I am a super carb person. Like, I have a constitution that needs carbs all the time. And so I have a really carby breakfast. So early research I've seen in this work anecdotally, but it's not well proven, is that carbs for breakfast can raise serotonin and protein brings it down. And so if you are somebody who's more wired for depression, we want to bring serotonin up. If you're more anxious, we want to bring serotonin down. So a protein heavy breakfast is for you. Really, just experiment. Right now I'm going through an oatmeal phase, but I went through a toast phase for years and years and years. And I would just get a really good quality bread at Nature's Fair and have butter and peanut butter, and it was glorious until it wasn't, and that's when I changed my breakfast. So experiment with what you do best with breakfast. Are you a protein breakfast person? Are you a carb breakfast person? Or are you a combination? So a combination might look like eggs and potatoes or sweet potatoes. And just see what keeps you full for 3 or 4 hours. If your breakfast doesn't keep you full for at least 3.5 hours, it's not the breakfast for you. The perfect breakfast keeps you going right till lunch, and lunch you're just starting to get hungry. It's no big deal. Lunch is another time that's really easy to go low carb. Like a salad with protein on top is really common, and then you just get tired and craving sugar at 4. So bringing in some carbohydrates into that lunch. So say you are a salad and protein kind of person, maybe bring some beans into it. Maybe bring some whole grains. Maybe make a bean salad instead, because beans are half carbohydrate but lots of protein. Just try a few things out and see what works. I've created a lunch recipe. I know what my lunch needs to keep me going right until 4 or 5 p.m. It needs something starchy, and so that can be leftover root vegetables is what I had this morning. It can be like a good quality whole grain bread or toast, or Waza crackers are also a favorite. It needs to have something with protein, so that could be hummus, could be eggs, it could be tuna, it could be leftover chicken, and it needs a vegetable. And so if I have leftover root vegetables, that plays both roles, but I find the toast does not. So I also need to add like avocado to it. If I have those 3 ingredients in my lunch, I am good to go. If I'm missing any of them, I'm hungry in an hour or 2. And so get to know what your lunch recipe is and figure out, okay, and the way to do that is you eat lunch and see which ones feel good. And so always be looking at your energy around 3 or 4 or 5 p.m. and say, how do I feel? Am I feeling good or am I crashing? A 4 p.m. snack, though, is always a good idea. A piece of fruit is wonderful at this time, and it lets you get home without opening up the doors and the cupboard doors and just diving straight in. And so consider bringing a snack if you work in an office, bring a snack to work to eat on your way home, or have it before you start making dinner so your blood sugar isn't crashing. Dinner doesn't have to have carbohydrates, but if you are a sweet craver after dinner, you probably need it. So you don't need to eat. Everybody doesn't need to eat carbohydrates in every meal, and there will always be a few people whose constitution thrives on a lower carb or lower starch diet. But most of us are in this deficient state. And so that's where making friends with carbs and developing a new relationship with them can be really helpful. Oh, I can see questions. Yay. Okay, so let me see. I love questions. Questions is like my favorite thing to do. And so I'm very happy when you guys ask me questions. So don't hesitate to keep me here as long as you'd like. I'm here to answer. So the first question that came in is from Barbara. And how do we balance all 3 macros for a type 2 diabetic? Oh, really great question, Barbara. So for a type 2 diabetic is somebody whose cells are insulin resistant. So what happens when we eat anything with glucose is our cells, this is a cell, my little hand's a cell. So our cells on the inside need glucose to run. But glucose is like a shard of glass. It can be really damaging to a cell if there's too much. And so the protection mechanism that our body has created is it's created an insulin receptor. So all of our cells have these insulin receptors, and insulin gets released by the pancreas at the same level as the glucose, hopefully, and it comes in, hits that receptor, opens up the cell, and lets just enough glucose to come in, closes it back up, and it needs more insulin to open it up again. In type 1 diabetes, which is an autoimmune condition, the insulin is missing. In type 2 diabetes, what's happened is over time, the insulin receptor is broken. And so the cell is saying, sugar, sugar, I need some glucose. The glucose is in the bloodstream. The insulin is in the bloodstream, but the cell can't open. And so what's really important with insulin resistance is to make sure that the glucose level doesn't get too high. So it's really, really important to create that trickle of glucose instead of a big spike. I've noticed that people with type 2 diabetes may commonly have a body that overreacts to grains, where their body does a blood sugar spike even when it's a whole grain like steel cut oatmeal. So sometimes going lower on grains can be helpful, but that's not the case for everybody. But focusing on starchy vegetables and beans can bring in that fiber. But the big thing for type 2 diabetes is using protein and using fat, so the other 2 macronutrients, to create a brake on that glucose. So if you eat a food that has a certain amount of glucose, so say it would naturally bring your blood sugar up and come down. When you add protein, it doesn't come up as high and takes longer to go up and down. But if you add fat, it's this really almost flat. Fat does a fantastic job at putting brakes on carbohydrates. So this means put butter on your potatoes and use fat and healthy fats as a means to help your body balance that glucose. Chromium can also be helpful to help fix those insulin receptors. It makes glucose tolerance factor, and I've had great results in my clients and bringing in this trace mineral of chromium to help bring their blood sugar down. Don't hesitate to book yourself in to talk about it further, Barbara. I'd be happy to help you find some balance. Let's see, the next question is from Hillary, and she asks, I've been eating dried fruit at night instead of dark chocolate, wondering if it's okay just to have the dried fruit, or should I add some nuts or something else with it? Great question, Hillary. First of all, don't be afraid of dark chocolate. Dark chocolate's glorious. Dark chocolate is full of antioxidants, lots of fiber, good fats, and magnesium, which is what your body might have been looking for. So it's about the amount. If you're like desperately craving dark chocolate in the evening and a couple squares just isn't doing it, you may need more food earlier. You may need more magnesium in your diet. Women, we tend to crave more magnesium the week before our cycle because our body needs more magnesium. Bringing in a supplement helps. So does making black bean brownies. And there's a recipe on my website for that. The the concern with dried fruit, Hillary, is that each dried fruit is a whole piece of fruit. With the well, grapes are too, but you can eat more grapes. Like a date or a prune or a dried apricot, that's a whole piece of fruit. Well, dried apricot is half, but and so it makes it really easy to eat a lot of them. And so with dried fruit, you're getting nutrients and you're getting fiber. They're a great source of sugar, but you can overdo it with dried fruit that you wouldn't do with regular fruit. And so, Hilly, I would do two things. Bring in some nuts just to kind of help you with that sweet. Like putting a peanut or an almond inside your date is glorious. And consider what you're eating earlier in the day. Are you eating enough? Because your body doesn't really want to eat in the evening, but it's doing that out of desperation because it's trying to fix something. So I would look at why you are having those cravings in the evening, and just celebrate the fact that you are choosing good choices. Just watch how many dates and dried fruit that you're eating at once. Couple like 2 or 3 dates is fine. 20 can cause an imbalance. Okay, so the next question is from Carmen. And she's asking, is it okay to drink water with a meal, or is it better to drink it before or after? When we drink water with meals, it dilutes our stomach acid and it overfills your stomach. And so it was used by the dieting industry in the 80s and 90s, Weight Watchers in particular, to help you eat less. Like drink a bunch of water so your stomach is mostly full and then you won't eat as much. But it causes major digestive issues, including heartburn and burping and indigestion. So what's best is to drink water up to about 15 minutes before eating, and then waiting at least an hour after eating before continuing to drink water. Little sips, like half a mug, like this much would be fine, but this whole mug would be too much because it just puts out your digestive fire otherwise. Let's see. The next one is from Bonnie, and she is saying, what are healthy fats? Oh, great question. Healthy fats are, the easiest way to look at it is how much processing did that fat need to go into to make it? So the fully unprocessed fats are things like avocado, nuts and seeds, and nut butters. Like nut butters were ground, but that's it. There is no pressing, no squeezing. The fat is in the food still. So those are the healthiest fats. Then there's the moderately processed. And so those are ones that these are generally fats that we've had culturally for a long time, because they're really easy to process. And in that category is butter, especially organic butter, because the cow was fed better food, olive oil, because you're pressing the fruit, not a seed, and coconut oil, again, pressing the fruit, not the seed. Those are minimally processed, and they tend to keep all their antioxidants, and they still smell like the food they came from. Medium healthy fats are some properly processed seed oils, and so those are usually ones that say cold pressed and are in dark bottles. Nature's Fair's fats oil section is full of these, like moderately processed but still pretty okay. The furthest end is the fats that you find, the oils that you find, they're not fats or oils, the oils that you find that are yellow, they have no smell, they can sit on the shelf for 2 or 3 or 4 years and no change whatsoever. Good healthy fats go rancid easily, processed fats don't. And the worst is when those fats are turned into margarine. All of the margarines, including the ones with the healthy labels on them, really processed and really terrible. And so let's bring into our diet these healthy fats that have essential fats in them, but also really important fat soluble vitamins, and let them squish out the other guys. If you have dry skin, dry eyes, just dry in general, there's a good chance you're either dehydrated or you could use more fat in your diet. Not enough fat is still a common problem in healthy eaters. Let's see. Next one is from Linda. She's asking, is rye bread a good substitute for whole grain bread? Rye bread is a whole grain bread. So we tend to, advertisers have done this to us. We tend to mix up whole grain and whole wheat. Whole grain is just a whole grain, and whole wheat is wheat, specifically whole. Rye is one of the best of the whole grain breads, especially when it's 100% rye. Rye is a harder one to process, and so watch the label, because frequently there's more refined wheat flour in there than rye specifically. At Nature's Fair, I shouldn't tell you this because it's glorious bread. Stone Oven makes a really good rye. Such a good rye. If you ever see me at the store and I see one there, and I kind of do a little happy dance when I pick it up because I'm so happy. It's such a lovely rye. But there's also, most grocery stores carry some really good German ryes. Are heavy, but they've got enormous flavor. They're so good. But yeah, rye bread's wonderful. It's really lovely. Just check the ingredients. And then there's a question from Jared. What kind of sources of carbohydrates would you recommend for an athlete, especially high intensity exercise? Jared, big question. And there's some nuance here. But when you're doing high intensity exercise, you need regular carbohydrates. And I'm not an expert in high level athletic nutrition. There are some really great nutritionists that can give you better advice than what I'm going to give you. But I have some experience in it, so I'll give you some highlights. There are going to be times where you're eating straight sugar, and that's okay, especially on long trips. That's where those like gels and sugar packs come from, but this could be honey, it could be dates. Your body will need steady carbohydrates all the time, but there could be, if you go to Precision Nutrition, they do a lot of really good athletic performance nutrition research, and they've done stuff on like carb cycling and protein cycling, that for high intensity athletes, this is when you want the math of nutrition. The average person, we don't want to think this hard about nutrition. Your body will just always be fighting back. But when you're using your body as a high-end machine, this is when you want to really optimize your nutrition. So Jared, check out Precision Nutrition. They do some really, really good work, and I do believe there are some nutritionists here in town in Kelowna that are trained by Precision Nutrition. So that's my go-to for athletic information, because it's really sound, and they are nutritionists who are also high-end athletes themselves. So they do a lot of experimentation on themselves before they give out information. Like, they really go out of their way to make sure that it's good information. Let's see. The next question is from Pearl. I'm trying to lose 10 to 20 pounds and I'm not having any success. I'm a type O, so I avoid grains and beans and walk every morning. I seem to have a low metabolism. How do I bring it up? It's a really common problem, Pearl. And in women, there isn't an easy answer. And I'm sorry to say that. But there's a few things. If you feel like, okay, first, let me take one step back. First, look at your cravings. When you're trying to lose weight, we tend to lower our overall food intake, and then our body starts screaming. And so what can happen if you've lowered it too low is you'll have like a few good days, maybe a week of good days. Let's use that in quotations, because there's like that connotation of a good day and bad day is problematic. So let's call them good days. So you have the days that you're eating the way you want to eat, and then your body takes over, and suddenly you're eating a bag of marshmallows, or you're eating a bag of cookies, and that's your body's fixing things, but that kind of negates what you've been doing, because your body was out of balance that whole time. So look at your cravings and make sure that what you're doing every day is balanced. So therefore, you may have cravings, but they're not that loud. You feel satisfied most of the day. That's the way to notice. One of the ways, there's two ways that you can help your metabolism. One, you can make sure you're eating enough of gut bacteria loving fiber, because that can help your metabolism. But the other one, and this is a common problem with women as we age, and this is any time you're past 40, is we lose muscle. And our metabolism slows down when we lose muscle. And so walking is wonderful, and it's a great exercise. Keep doing that. add some muscle building. And then when you start doing strength training, so you're strengthening your bones while you're strengthening your muscles, like it's wonderful for the whole body. Your body shape changes before the scale does. And so sometimes our head gets attached to a number instead of how we feel. And so notice how strong you feel. Notice if your body shape is changing in ways that you'd like it, and don't just ignore the scale. The scale means nothing. But if you want some more help, if you want some more like very Pearl specific ideas, book yourself in for a free half hour, and we can look at some techniques that might work for your body specifically. I don't like giving general weight loss advice because there isn't any general weight loss advice. That's just throws us down the wrong path. And instead, I like to work with each person as they are and find the specific tweaks that they need. Let's see if there's any more questions. That was the last one I saw. Okay, it looks like those are all the questions. Don't forget to come to Nature's Fair for the Winter Wellness Sale on December 3rd and 4th, where it's at all the stores have 15% off vitamins, supplements, and personal care like makeup and body washes. Start your list because I always forget things, so I have a list going on my fridge. You can book yourself a free half-hour consult with me. I see that Melissa added it to the comments, so you can easily book in. I also have a book available, Undieting, Freedom from the Bewildering World of Fad Diets. If you like this philosophy and you want to learn more, go to undieting.ca and you can buy the book either through me or through online retailers, and Mosaic Downtown Kelowna generally carries it. And thank you all so much for joining me and sticking with me right to the end. I really appreciate your time tonight. I hope it's been information that's been helpful, and don't hesitate to put any follow-up questions. I'll keep an eye on the comments over the next few days. But thank you so much for joining me tonight. I appreciate your time, and have a good night.